everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Amanda, and I love exploring creepy, unsolved topics as well as urban legends. If you like hearing about that, then you should definitely hit that subscribe button because I'm here every Friday afternoon. Well, afternoon my time anyway. Today, I wanted to talk about the Dark Watchers, an urban myth that has originated out of California. Let's start with the history of these supposed spooky travelers, as well as who they are in the first place, and then we'll get into their place in modern day and why they might exist at all. The Dark Watchers are often described as motionless in long black cloaks, often in broad-trimmed hats with a walking stick, but always silent, still, and featureless. Artist renderings of them have these people, or maybe even creatures, looking like a statue out of the Old West, tall, looming, and inky black. They've often been said to haunt the Santa Lucia Mountains in particular, and seen in places that no human could climb to. They stand anywhere from 7 to 10 feet and appear at sundown or occasionally dawn, but they vanish almost the moment they are seen. Don't get me wrong, I've heard plenty of stories about strange figures that appear and then vanish the moment you catch a glimpse of them. But according to all of the accounts of this, they have a really recognizable shape. These aren't just the shadow people that lurk behind corners or in your periphery vision. These are the Dark Watchers. According to the Santa Maria Times, they are most often described as looking out to sea, as if waiting for something to appear on the distant horizon. Some say they bring bad luck to those who see them. Others claim they are benevolent spirits, while others feel they resemble the Grim Reaper. Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo was the first European to document the Santa Lucia Mountains when he sailed past them in 1542, and they were named by the Spanish cartographer Sebastian Vicanzo, I'm sorry, I'm probably butchering all that, 60 years later. Early Spanish settlers to the Central Coast quickly became aware of the Dark Watchers, dubbing them Los Vigilantes Obscuros. As time passed, the Dark Watchers became part of local lore. In 1937, poet Robinson Jeffers referred to them. He thought it might be one of the Watchers who are often seen in this length of coast range. These have got to be the oldest creatures in lore that I've seen in the US thus far in my little journey from state to state with creepy lore here. Pukwudgies and the Cropsey Killer certainly haven't been around this long. Although documentation is pretty minimal since before the 1930s, since many of my sources state that European settlers spotted them in the 1500s and then in the 1700s the Spanish colonists. However, it's also frequently suggested that the earliest mentions of the Dark Watchers actually appear in legends and folklore native to Chumash tribes native to the Central Coast. These legends, some say, date back more than 13,000 years. However, one source claims that it really doubts this is the case because what is generally accepted as the most authoritative work documenting Chumash beliefs, December's Child by Thomas C. Blackburn, doesn't mention this folklore at all. So if the Dark Watchers really were a part of Chumash folklore, you'd think that this book of Chumash oral narratives would mention them. Also, I feel like I might be saying that word wrong, Chumash. I don't know. Rarely are words as easy to say as they appear, so sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. But anyway, their origin is still unknown because of this, though we do know, thanks to Jeffers' poem in 1937, that they've been around since then at the very latest. However, this still leaves the question, what do the Dark Watchers do? Are they dangerous? To answer this question, I decided to look into some supposed sightings of the Dark Watchers to better understand what they do. One source told me that they're actually up to 15 feet tall and that there was a known sighting of them in the 1960s, as well as more recent ones in 2011 and 2013. It states, in the mid-1960s, there was an alleged sighting of the Dark Watchers made by a high school teacher who was out hiking in the range at the Monterey Peninsula. As he walked along, he claimed he had seen a tall dark figure looming up upon a ridge, which seemed to be in the process of merely standing and contemplating the scenery. The hiker called out to the mysterious figure, and at that instance, the entity simply dissolved from sight as if it had never been there at all. There have been numerous supposed sightings of these strange entities since right up into very recent years. One strange occurrence was told by a witness from Moreno Valley, California, who in 2011 said, "Many, many years ago, I was with a friend driving through a dirt field here in Moreno Valley near Alessandro, Old East Part, near what I believe were old abandoned barns that I always had heard were haunted when my friend's car broke down. Could have been a coincidence, it was a beat-up Volkswagen Bug. It was dusk at best, and there was no way we were going to make it out of the field before it was pitch black. Instead of chancing getting stupidly lost and or hurt in the dark, we decided to sleep in the car and set out in the morning to go get help to tow the car. It was way before the days of everyone having cell phones and quick help. As we were killing time in the pitch black now, we were hanging outside and outside of the car, killing time, sharing smokes, and we started to distinctly see what looked like black shadows, evenly distributed, completely encircling us. They did not move. They stayed motionless, but were of significant size, and based on the distance, I would say at least the size of a small car like the Bug we ourselves were in. Whatever these were seemed hunched over, perhaps kneeling. Time passed. They never moved, and though we walked around the car and got in and out of the car to see what if we were seeing was some sort of optical illusion, we couldn't explain or discredit what we were seeing. To this day, it racks my brain." In 2013, there was a report made by an Elizabeth Benitez of San Mateo, California, who claimed to have seen the specters in broad daylight near the San Luis Obispo Reservoir. She would say of the encounter, quote, "I remember one day my friend and I were coming back from Los Angeles. We passed the San Luis Obispo Reservoir, and as we drove on the road, I saw something at a distance down the end of the mountain. It was a really big human figure, but it wasn't. It had a black cape, kind of like the Grim Reaper, and it was leaning over, holding onto a staff at a puddle of water, or so would it seemed at a distance. It was in daytime too, so I could identify it wasn't a person. Even in mid-light, he was very black and reminded me of a raven. I told my friend that was driving over to look at the mountains, and surprisingly, she was able to see a glimpse of it. I asked her what she saw without giving me any details, and she saw exactly what I saw. She only looked at it for about 5 seconds, but she was able to see it. She almost lost control of the car when she looked away, but I begged her to go back and see it, but she was very tired of driving already. These dark watchers are real." End quote. The good news is that, unlike the other lore I've discussed on this channel so far, these dark watchers seem entirely harmless. Another 2013 account from a witness only known as Brian from Hollister, California, claimed to have seen these entities when he was driving home. He said that it had a, quote, large cape with broad shoulders and a hunched back, end quote. When he found a spot in the cliffy road to turn around and get a better look, it was gone. A similar event happened in 2015, and the witness said that they saw it in 2014, but then again in the same place a year later. Then, in 2018, one witness stated, "I was hiking up a remote trail in the 33 in Ojai. I was about an hour up the mountain, no people, no cars in sight. As I was hiking, I had this eerie feeling that I was being watched. I looked up at the top of the mountain, and it was a black figure. I waved, jokingly, not really thinking that the object was a person. It waved back. Thinking I was maybe tripping or that it was a tree waving in the wind, I took a puff of my cigarette only to see the figure blow out a plume of smoke as well. I started seeing it flowing, and I say flowing, almost floating vertically. I ran like hell back to my car, spraining my knee in the process." There's quite a few of those accounts and sightings online, and all of them are pretty similar. I'm not saying this is proof that the beings exist, but I'd say it's more compelling than perhaps aliens or pukwudgies for me personally, because these people all have such close accounts. Perhaps with the exception of the 2018 witness, because with that one I think that's the only one I've seen where there's a lot more interaction. Perhaps there is something to these people, whether it's specific rock formations or some kind of explainable solution, or even something strange and spiritual, like a being wandering these mountains. So the next question is, what would an explainable source be? Why are all these people seeing such similar visions? In order to answer that, and to hopefully answer it before my throat gives out for today, we're going to tackle the why of the Dark Watchers. An article from Bustle states that most of the shadow people we see that appear and vanish are overwhelmingly negative and show negative behavior towards us. Yet, the Dark Watchers, again, don't seem to be that way. They're only, well, watching, observing it seems. However, the history of the Santa Lucia Mountains themselves, or at least their name, is far from a pleasant one. One source states, although St. Lucy never set foot in these Santa Lucia Mountains, they were named in her honor in 1602 by Spanish explorer Sebastian I'm gonna say this wrong, Vizcaíno? So who was Lucy anyway? Well, as with most historical accounts, that information depends on the source. What is agreed upon is that Lucy lived in Syracuse on the island of Sicily, where in the early 4th century, under the rule of Roman Emperor Diocletian, when being a follower of Christ was a crime. Still, as a devout Christian, Lucy's faith was irrepressible. Works of art portray Lucy holding a pair of eyes on a plate, which is where history starts to get a bit blurry. In an effort to illuminate the Sicilian martyr's moral conduct and courage, stories differ. One telling of Lucy's story is that she had taken vows of chastity to devote her life to prayer and service to the Lord. Her mother had other ideas and arranged for Lucy to marry a non-Christian man. Lucy refused. Her firmly held beliefs caused her to thwart her suitor's advances. She gave away all of the money that was saved for her dowry to the poor. The vengeful pagan bridegroom then accused Lucy of being a Christian and reported her to the authorities. Lucy was arrested and persecuted. The governor of Syracuse, Pachiassus, demanded defilement of Lucy. Guards hitched her to a team of oxen, but the beasts of burden failed to move her. The guards then piled firewood around Lucy, but the logs would not ignite. Ever committed, Lucy refused to renounce Christianity. Infuriated, Pachiassus ordered the guards to gouge out Lucy's eyes. Or, in another interpretation of Lucy's narrative, she removed her own eyes and gave them to the suitor who had admired her for such. Nevertheless, Lucy's torture was merciless. The guards then plunged their swords into her body, and Lucy died. It was the year AD 303 or AD 304, according to some references, when she was martyred for her faith. As the story goes, when her body was prepared for burial, attendants discovered that her eyes had been restored. In the view of the fact that Lucy's name means light or lucid, and various versions of her legend recount that her eyes were removed, Lucy is known as the patron saint of the blind. Lucky for authors and journalists, especially Santa Lucia Mountain residents who often put pen to paper for some reason, Lucy is also known as the patron saint of writers. It's anyone's guess why Vizcaíno chose Lucy for the namesake of this mountain range. Perhaps while on his expedition, the explorer awoke to the surroundings set ablaze with brilliant sunbeams, or the blinding rays of light from above may have inspired him. But regardless of the reason, he did indeed honor her by naming this majestic mountain range Sierra de Santa Lucia. Now, there's plenty of skepticism to be found online. Obviously, some people might buy this story, some people might not. That depends on you. And some people just credit this all to pareidolia when our mind attributes a familiar image or sound to a familiar pattern when none actually exists. As I think I've mentioned before on this channel when talking about the island of the dolls, our eyes are meant to see faces. Our eyes are meant to see dolls and to see creepy images, perhaps. But I guess the question is, are people seeing the Dark Watcher because they believe he's out there and they may envision him when he doesn't exist, or she, or does the Dark Watcher actually exist and people just excuse it as phenomena? The Dark Watchers are most famously given a brief mention in John Steinbeck's Flight, included in the 1938 collection of his short stories The Long Valley. That section reads, Pepe looked suspiciously back every minute or so, and his eyes sought the tops of ridges ahead. Once, on a white barren spur, he saw a black figure for a moment, but he looked quickly away, for it was one of the Dark Watchers. No one knew who the Watchers were, nor why they lived, but it was better to ignore them and to never show interest in them. They did not bother one who stayed on the trail and minded his own business. And of course, there's Jeffers' poem from 1937, so whether or not the Watchers do exist at all, or Lucia's story and the Chumash had it as part of their folklore, I think it's fascinating how the Watchers has become a part of California's legend anyway. But with all that said, that's where I'm going to end today's video. My voice really needs a break. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you all next time. If you did like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you would like to see next, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye guys!